and trust that this session will prove impactful and insightful for all. Before we move ahead with the event guide and the agenda, I'd like to draw your attention to these hashtags below your screen. Hashtag digital channels, hashtag KPMG digital channels scorecard, hashtag KPMG digital, hashtag CX, hashtag UX. Let's use these hashtags to interact on social, to share your thoughts, your ideas, and key insights as the webinar goes along. Our event guide is simple. For the audience, if you have questions or would like to interact with speakers or panelists, please drop your questions in the Q&A icon below your screen and refer to the chat section for useful information from our event admin. The webinar will run for approximately 2 hours and have 5 sections. We'll kick off with a welcome and opening remarks from our national senior partner. We'll then discuss key insights from the KPMG Digital Channel Scorecard. We'll have 2 panel sessions, and then we'll end with the publication launch and closing remarks. Without much ado, with us today is the national senior partner of KPMG and chairman of KPMG Africa, Kunle Elebute, who will provide the formal introduction to this webinar.
Good morning, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the KPMG Digital Channel Scorecard 2020 webinar, which has been themed leveraging superior user experience on digital channels to drive retail banking growth. COVID-19 pandemic has caused us to change the way we live, work, and interface with service providers. As we shift from short-term responses to the pandemic to a new way of life, it has become imperative for service providers to fully adopt digital business models. While several organizations have commenced their digital transformation journey, there's no doubt that the pandemic has created an urgency to accelerate the digital transformation agenda, with the top priority being how to rethink and redesign end-to-end customer-centric digital experiences. During this webinar, we shall share perspective and insights garnered from our outside-in review of the digital channels of 17 retail banks in Nigeria. We will also highlight our observations on leading practices, emerging trends, and perspectives on opportunities for improving user experience across several retail banking customer journeys. This webinar is the first in a series of events created by KPMG to provide deep insights to organizations on how to leverage enhanced customer-centric experience to create and capture transformational value. I look forward to exciting, insightful, and engaging decisions today, and I trust that you will find these sessions worthwhile as you continue your digital transformation journeys. I wish to thank you all for honoring my invitation. Thank you and good morning.
Our first speaker is the partner and lead digital transformation KPMG in Africa. He is responsible for driving KPMG's digital and fintech agenda across the continent. He will be discussing key insights from the Digital Channel Scorecard. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Boye Ademola.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the KPMG Digital Channels 2020 webinar. The COVID pandemic has necessitated the need to accelerate digital across many businesses. One of the things that COVID is basically necessitating is the need to be able to run businesses completely off the channels. In other words, businesses today, as one of the enduring responses to COVID, have to be able to run their businesses off the channels. The channels are the end point on all that we're doing from a digital transformation perspective. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is to essentially share with you insights gleaned from the Digital Channel Scorecard review of 17 different retail banks in Nigeria. I will share with you our methodology, but more importantly, I will share with you the insights gleaned, from this review. And at the end of my session, I will ask a panel of those who were very intrinsic in performing the reviews to also expound on some of the insights from the work. So let's dive into it. I think the first point on COVID is quite clear. And I will just go straight into looking at how we approached it. We approached this review from a customer perspective, all right? It's important to distinguish the fact that we're building on our banking industry customer satisfaction survey that we've done for over 10 years now. When we do the BICS, we survey customers and essentially present the voice of the customer. The Digital Channel Scorecard is looking at this from another lens, and this is from the lens of the banks themselves and the capabilities that the banks offer on their digital channels. Like I said, from a customer perspective, the channels, we believe, are the endpoint on all that we're doing from a digital or digital transformation perspective. So then we focused on looking at 13 different journeys, and we grouped them into 5 thematic areas. We looked at digital onboarding, the ability for banks to onboard customers end-to-end digitally without requiring the customers to go to the bank or have any physical interaction. We looked at payments and transfers. We looked at digital lending, and then we looked at self-service. And the last anchor journey that we looked at, the thematic area that we looked at, is customer care or customer service. So we looked at these 5 journeys largely from a customer perspective. We reviewed the channels of the banks using these experiences that any customer at the time of our review will also experience. And then we focused on 4 important channels. They are by no means the only channels, but from this review, our focus was on mobile, Ussd, internet banking, and chatbots. In terms of the scorecard itself, we used our UX assessment framework, and that framework essentially, has a number of criteria for assessing user journeys. One of the very important criteria is functionality. A functionality has to work to deliver a service to a customer. When a customer comes, cannot perform the service or get the result that they want, then the experience is frustrating. Minimalism is about channels being simple and intuitive, easy to discover for customers when they go on your site. Efficiency is what we call interaction cost, the number of clicks. So the less or the fewer the clicks, then the more efficient you are. Personalization, really important, about creating contextual experiences for customers. And then consistency and aesthetics. As we did this review, we essentially plotted the emotions of users as they go through the channels of the banks. And these emotions, when the functionality and the experience is top-notch, then users are excited. They ultimately become advocates, brand ambassadors for that institution. At the extreme end, if they're unable to get what they want, then they will be frustrated. So this essentially is the framework that we use. So just to help us, what I've done here is to show an indicative journey. All right, so this is an indicative journey. One of the journeys, just one, and how these journeys look for each bank. So here, for instance, a user is trying to do a funds transfer, and he discovers, the funds transfer icon, but at some point is unable to do his transaction because he experiences challenges around authentication. So he starts off as indifferent from a user perspective, ends up frustrated. All right, this is just an example. So we then created these journey maps for each of the 13 journeys we looked at across the 17 banks for each of the channels that we looked at. And at the end, we then moderated, looking at, looking at the experience for customers for the different journeys for each of the bank. We then moderated the scores. We looked at outliers, and we essentially compared and benchmarked to be sure that, there's a balance in the scoring. So here is how we've then categorized every bank for every journey and on every channel. We have the leaders, and the leaders category really are banks in a particular journey that are able to deliver that journey, first of all, end-to-end digitally, but also they are delivering delightful experience to customers. At the extreme end are the late starters. The late starters generally have not deployed that functionality for one reason or the other. Or perhaps I've tried to start the functionality, but the functionality really, very quickly, the user experiences breakages in the journey and can't continue. The challengers are those who deliver this functionality but come short on experience. The challengers we found are quite close to the leaders. And then the followers are people that are delivering this functionality but need to deal with things like asking customers to go to the branch, transferring them to the call center, or making a demand on a requirement on the customers to use their debit cards when debit cards have not been issued for them to complete a transaction. So this essentially are the 4 categories in the scorecard. So in this section, I will just speak a bit about the output of the scorecard, the insights of the scorecard. One of the first things, that is clear to us from reviewing the industry is that digital onboarding continues to be a challenge. 85% of the banks that we looked at were unable to onboard customers digitally end-to-end at the time that we did this review, which was between May and July 2020. So think about that number, 85%. So most of the banks are unable to onboard customers digitally end-to-end. And there are a number of reasons for this. However, we still found banks in the leadership tier here. And for this is Standard Chartered Bank on mobile banking. For Ussd, it's Zenith Bank and Stanbic IBTC. The next major journey we looked at, payments and transfer. And as you will expect, this is an area that banks did quite well in terms of the capability. We have a lot of maturity in this area. And indeed, we can see that there's a lot of innovation on top of payments and transfers that we're seeing in our market. The lead for mobile banking, Wema and GT Bank, and for internet banking, Wema Bank, and then Ussd, GT Bank. We looked at digital lending, and again, digital lending is an area where banks are really very nascent in terms of the evolution. We think that there is an opportunity, perhaps the time may be right with the global standing instruction, the proliferation of data, and the emergence of AI to really look at this opportunity. We see a country like Kenya, which was like Nigeria for many years, the penetration of retail lending was very low. And then Kenya Commercial Bank, NCBA, and Safaricom partnered together to develop a product called Fuliza. And in 1 year, Fuliza had covered over 10 million users. So this is an example of the opportunity that we see from a digital lending perspective. We will discuss this in a bit more details when we go into the panel session. The self-service agenda and the scorecard for self-service is really important. Self-service is about empowering customers to essentially enjoy banking services on the channels, anywhere they are. And it's really important when you think about moving customers from the branches to the channels. It reduces the cost to serve. It has opportunities to generate revenues from value-added services. And frankly speaking, it improves the experience. Examples of things in what we call self-services will be customers managing their cards, requesting for a card, turning off their card, requesting for a statement, and the different things that customers want to do at the branches or with their bank. But what's interesting is that on average, 75% of banks that we assessed do not have sufficiently robust self-service features from the review that we did. So it's an area where there is a lot of opportunity, all right, to digitize for the banks to essentially move, the play from brick and mortar to the channels. The leaders for mobile banking, Wema, Access, and Standard Chartered Bank, and for Chatbot, Fidelity Bank. The last journey that we looked at was the customer care journey. And here, again, banks here, we have different levels of maturity. Generally, we see that contact centers have been implemented, but the key challenges will be around responsiveness. It will be around scale, because as you scale retail, then you ask yourself how many people are going to man those contact centers. So again, the digitizing of it, the introduction of chatbots or virtual assistants are things that banks have an opportunity to look at in this area. From a mobile banking perspective, our leader was Wema Bank, and from a chatbot perspective, the leader was Fidelity Bank. So these are the 5 anchor journeys. We call them thematic areas that we looked at. Remember, this is from a customer perspective. In the next slide, I will then sort of summarize on a channel basis how we saw the banks. So from a channel perspective, mobile banking, again, we will look at each channel and we will look at, from that channel perspective, what bank essentially was in the leadership categories across the different customer journeys. And on an overall basis, the leader for mobile banking is Alert by Wema. Alert comes tops, leader in the payments and transfer journey, leader in self-service, leader from a customer care journey perspective, and was a challenger in the digital onboarding category. The next one is Ussd. And for Ussd, it was interesting because we've done a lot in payments and transfers, but on an overall basis, the team really felt that there was no leader, particularly because we haven't really seen banks extend the capabilities of this channel into other journeys. We had 6 challengers led by Guaranteed Trust Bank in this category. For internet banking, again, we did not see any leader. We see from just engaging with the banks that because the traffic is largely on mobile and USSD in our markets, it appears that banks may not be investing in their internet banking channel. So we did not see any leader for internet banking. We have 1 challenger, Alert Online by Wema Bank. And finally, the last channel is chatbots. And for the chatbots in this category, the leader is Ivy by Fidelity Bank. Ivy led in self-service, Ivy led in customer care, and was the challenger from a digital onboarding perspective. This is also an area where we think banks have an opportunity to invest a bit more in chatbots, particularly given the millennials, and also to ensure that the cost of engagement can come down, leveraging virtual assistant, chatbots, and the likes, to engage with customers. All right, so for us, as we then sat back and looked at this, we said to ourselves, what exactly really are we, is the next frontier from where the banks are. It's clear banks have made a lot of progress, but what are the things that banks need to focus on? In terms of COVID itself, which in itself is an opportunity to accelerate the digital agenda. For us, there are three things. The user-centered journeys is one of these things. It's the whole concept around designing around the user, the concepts around design thinking, the concepts around prototyping before we start building solutions. It's the concept that challenges adding functionality and functionality and functionality to channels until everything becomes clunky and unwieldy. So it's important that, you know, we design around the customer. I think that's important. One of the things that we believe is the next frontier for banks. The other one is around the omni-channel concept. We think omni-channel is still relevant, particularly because we saw that banks would deliver a functionality on a channel very well. Same functionality on another channel is not even existent or is delivered poorly. And that's the omni-channel concept. It's around delivering products and services to customers regardless of the channel they choose to engage with. And then the last one is around personalization and being more contextual as we engage with our clients. So here is the presentation. What we're going to do is dive in and glean a bit more insights from our panel who were really involved in doing this assessment. Before then, I want to play a video that goes back to user-centered journeys. As you look at the video, you probably think it's an application, but it's not an application. What it is essentially a prototype, and is around the concept of user-centered journeys, designing around the user. Let's watch the video. Thank you.
While the video is coming up, just a quick check-in with our participants and a reminder about the Q&A section. Please feel free to post your questions and interact with the panelists and speakers as the webinar goes on. Thank you very much.
Meet Francis. Francis is a public health worker who has recently been employed and wants to open a bank account to receive his monthly salary and manage his finances. He recently heard about the fantastic rates offered on savings accounts by ACME Bank and would like to open an account with the bank. Excited, he downloads the ACME banking application to commence the account opening process. He selects the option to open an account and he is asked for his desired transaction range. He selects the 5,000 to 30,000 Naira option and he is excited as he is informed that only his BVN, signature, and passport photograph are required for the account opening process. He puts in his BVN and he's prompted to provide his passport photograph by taking a selfie on his smartphone. He's asked to blink to confirm there is a live person behind the camera. His selfie is automatically captured and the image is verified with the image on his BVN records. The images have a 95% match, which is the threshold set by the bank. He then proceeds to upload his signature. His account is successfully created and he is prompted to create an online banking profile. His e-profile is created successfully and he can now enjoy all the benefits offered by ACME Bank without having to visit any of the bank's physical branches. After 2 years, Francis has received a significant salary rise. He is very happy with the ACME banking app and desires to make the ACME bank account his primary account. He needs to upgrade his profile to transact with much higher limits. He also wants to request for a loan to take a part-time medical course during his upcoming vacation. Francis logs into the app to migrate to a higher account tier. He clicks the profile option and selects upgrade account. The app displays the upgrade options and Francis selects the highest account tier. He opts for the option to retrieve his KYC documents from one of his other banks. The app then downloads his verified ID and utility bill from his selected bank. The address verification is successful and Francis receives a notification indicating that his account has been successfully upgraded. Once the upgrade is completed, Francis receives a message indicating he is eligible for a personal loan. He clicks a notification to commence the loan application process. This app informs Francis of the maximum loan amount he is eligible for. However, he wants a higher loan amount. Hence, Francis selects the I need more option. He is asked to grant permission to ACME Bank to access his transaction history from his other banks in order to determine his eligibility for a higher loan amount. Francis grants the permission, and ACME Bank pulls his transaction history from other banks and determines that Francis is eligible for a higher loan amount. Francis is excited, as the updated offer is more than the loan amount he desires. Francis confirms his request, and he is informed that the bank is permitted to debit his other accounts in the event of a loan default. Francis assents to the terms. He finalizes the loan request by authorizing with his fingerprint. His loan request is automatically approved, and the loan amount is disbursed instantly into his account. Francis is delighted with the experience on the ACME mobile banking application. He becomes an advocate of ACME Bank and tells his friends to open an account with the bank. Serving as panelists on the first panel session, themed Leveraging Superior User Experience on Digital Channels to Drive Growth, we have Ladi Asuni, Partner, Digital Transformation, KPMG, Nigeria. Ladi has deep industry experience delivering technology-enabled business transformation programs, as well as the design and implementation of digital channels for financial service organizations. Tunji Odumoboni, an Associate Director in KPMG's Digital Transformation Practice and lead API and Digital Platforms KPMG in Africa. He is responsible for delivering API strategies and digital platform implementations across financial services and telecommunications industries. He has vast experience in solution designs and implementations across Africa. Also serving as panelists are Lanre Akomolafe and Inyola Abosede Brown, who are digital channel team leads in KPMG's digital transformation practice. They have led teams of consultants in the reviews of digital channels in financial services across Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, and Francophone countries. To moderate this panel session is our previous speaker, Boye Ademola. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the panelists and moderator.
All right, thank you, panelists, for joining us. And let's go straight into it. Ladi, I want us to essentially start by you giving us some context around, why the choice of the 5 thematic areas that we chose to focus on for this assessment.
Okay. So we decided to look at this 5 thematic journeys, just as presented earlier: digital onboarding, digital lending, payments and transfers, self-service, and customer care. Not because these are exhaustive journeys, but because this represents a significant majority of what customers perform or would typically want to perform on their banking channels. Again, one of the contexts that is important for our audience is that this was initiated during the pandemic lockdown period, where branches were not accessible in most of Nigeria. And we asked critical questions around what sort of activities do customers need to perform during such a period. Another thing that has also fed into our choice of journeys is our BICS review, which has also highlighted the typical activities that customers perform, on a daily or weekly basis. And these are the journeys that came tops across the different journeys that customers would likely want to perform in a typical banking scenario.
All right, thank you, Ladi. Tunji, let's just jump into one of the journeys, digital onboarding. Can you tell us, Tunji, 85% of banks are unable to onboard customers digitally end-to-end, all right? What is the challenge here? And what can banks that are, listening to us this morning, what can they do about this challenge?
We know the onboarding process in banks is an highly regulated area. And therefore, there are a number of safeguards that the CBN has sort of put in place, regulations to protect the integrity of the process, some risk that is inherent in that process. For instance, there's the identity theft. You need to be clear on who you are dealing with as a bank, and therefore that process in itself is very well regulated. And from the assessment we did, it appears to us that banks have taken what I'll call a compliance-centric approach to designing the KYC process. And what that means also is that if you look at the inherent risk like identity theft, we see some banks, it appears to us that banks have also taken the approach to avoid avoid the inherent risk around KYC, around identity theft. So rather than deploying the power of technology to mitigate some of this risk, we see instances where a number of banks are not do not support the KYC document upload functionality, a critical part of that journey. And we've also seen banks. You mentioned Standard Chartered as a leader in this space. We've seen Standard Chartered Bank and a couple of other banks in the Challenger Park, deploy technologies that can essentially mitigate that risk of identity theft. So where customers are required to take their photographs, there's also something that sort of validates that you have an actual human taking that picture. So you have the you have the liveliness check sort of control behind that. So it means that if I need to onboard from wherever, just like I can be in the branch and you can validate that the person standing in front of you is a human and not a still image. There are technology capabilities that can enable you to do that. So banks typically have avoided this risk rather than sort of mitigate the risk with transformative tech like AI. And I think, the whole concept of user-centric design is one powerful one that we think will really help banks as they navigate the challenges, the risk, try to comply. And I also spoke earlier about the process in itself being compliance-centric. So you have banks that sort of inundate customers, from the get-go with all the KYC Tier 3 requirements. And you have instances where customers, the customer really doesn't care about regulation, so to speak, in terms of what documentation I need to provide. What they care is they need service, they know what they need. And if the banks are paying attention to the opportunities, which for me is really big in terms of opportunities to personalize, pay attention to that, you can really then know what does this customer want. For instance, a student who has come on the channels to just sort of create an account that he can use to collect stipend from his parent probably needs a Tier 1 account. And as he progresses in his career, maybe becomes it becomes an employee of some sort somewhere later in his career, he may need a more sophisticated account. And at that point, you can offer him the capability to upgrade. So those are some of the things we think can really help, making the process personalized so that you are really offering the customer what you really want, limiting the number of inputs the customer needs to make to what he really needs at that point.
All right, thanks, Tunji. The digital onboarding, I think, is just listening to you is still a big opportunity. We know from BVN that just about 44 million people are banked, probably less than 50% of the adults or the bankable population in Nigeria. So being, like you say, from a design thinking perspective, reimagining the digital onboarding can be one of those things that help to really bring more people into the banking sector.
Yes,
Inya,
I'm going. If I may add to
Okay,
add as
please.
well.
Go on,
One of the things we're also seeing within the bank is that the entire KYC process is sort of sits within each of the banks. Where we think the industry needs to move to is to a point where the KYC documents are centralized. And I give you a typical example. I have my KYC that we verified with Bank A, for instance. And then I'm trying to open an account with Bank B, and then I have to go through the entire process again. Bank B is required to come to my house to verify my address and things like that. Where the industry really needs to go to is at a point where this is centralized, either with the government or via these are open banking, open API concepts, where each of the banks are able to expose API. And you can charge a token for it, where other banks can then just verify against your already verified KYC. And then use that as a means for verifying the customer and granting access to the customer, granting an account to the customer.
All right, Larry, I think that's a really important point, and is in a sense tied to what we're seeing around open banking in Europe, in the UK in particular, being able to make this, in a sense, part of our national infrastructure, the whole identity verification. All right, very quickly, I would like Inyi to talk to us about self-service. How strategic is the self-service opportunity? And what did we see looking at the banks? And again, what did we see looking at the leaders? And what are the things going into the future from a self-service perspective that banks ought to pay attention to?
Okay, so from our assessment, what we noted is that the delivery of self-service features in the Nigerian financial services industry is currently not at the scale that it's supposed to be at the moment. In fact, only about 20% of banks reviewed, are beginning to fully grasp exactly what self-service entails. And to be clear at this point, at the core of self-service delivery is the digitization of services that are normally provided in branch or via the customer support center, which enables customers to execute their transactions or pull requests to the banks themselves via the digital channels without interfacing with any bank staff or with the customer care center. And given what is currently ongoing, the global pandemic, which has resulted in restriction of movement, based on policies by the government and all that, the case for self-service has never ever been stronger than this. So it's really strategic for banks to be able to key in to this and be able to deliver adequate self-service, seamless self-service to their customers. So to be specific, what we found from our assessment is that most banks have tried, about 80% of banks are currently trying to implement self-service features. However, they have not been able to fully digitize the entire process. So you find fragmented journeys that require a customer to start the self-service process on a channel, but then you need to complete it by visiting a branch or interfacing with the staff or the customer care center. So the digital journey, the digital experience always breaks at that point where they are supposed to go to the branch. For instance, some banks have tried to implement debit card requests on their digital channels. However, the delivery of those cards require the receipts or collection of those cards require customers to come into the branch. And at this point, customers are averse to that, given what is currently happening globally. So banks need to look at this, need to be able to review their channels, review the services that they currently offer in branch and via the customer care center, and be able to, come up innovatively with how to digitize these processes and then offer them on their digital channels. Another thing we saw is that customers are not giving visibility into the progress of their self-service requests. So a customer requests for a debit card, but he doesn't know exactly, at what point is the card being printed, is his name being embossed on the card, is it being delivered to the branch, even at this point, even if they've not, started with delivering to, the customers' homes. So customers and banks need to actually, involve customers in the process of responding to those self-service requests. A case in point, though, in another industry is Jumia Food. So you order food on Jumia, on Jumia food, they tell you, oh, the food is leaving the restaurant right now, it's being given to the dispatch rider. You know, you are carried along all the way. If there's traffic, you know there's going to be a delay. We also experienced that with Uber. The driver is going to be, you know, is going to be late, 5 minutes late. So these are things that banks need to look at to involve the customers, to manage their expectations. Because the customers we have now, they are mobile first. They are comparing banks to other industries, to the telecoms industry, to the FMCGs and all of that. And they get better experience there. So banks need to actually look at this to, you know, lead in this space. Another issue that we noted, or another observation we had, is the limited breadth of services on digital channels with respect to self-service. So we found that many banks offer maybe just basic card requests, but there are other, you know, essential services that customers are expecting. Services like comprehensive card control. So we found the leader in this space to offer card control services such as, you know, enabling a customer to block his card, you know, on POS alone while it works on ATM and other channels, you know, enable or block a card for international transactions. So there are other flexibilities. They need to give customers options. Banks need to look to give customers options and make these services flexible enough for customers to, you know, adopt them. Right now, we think from our assessment, what we think is that banks need to, in order to lead in the self-service space, banks need to actually do a comprehensive review of all the services that are provided in branch, as I mentioned, and then be able to digitize these processes end to end, from start to finish, with the customer in mind, with the customer at the center, putting the customer in the journey to ensure that, you know, the needs of customers are met and their expectations are also met, and then start implementing from there. They also need to realize that this is a journey. It can't be completed in one day. So that's the feedback.
All right. Yeah, I like the point you made on on the fact that this is a journey. And Tunji, I want you to just sort of expound on this self-service. How can, you know, banks leverage self-service to, in a sense, begin to go on the platform journey, to, in a sense, collaborate more with fintechs? We saw, for instance, you know, Fuliza, which was Kenya Commercial Bank, and NCB in Kenya collaborating with Safaricom to deliver a winning product. Again, is this not part of the self-service agenda, or would you say that, you know, a platform and a collaboration with the ecosystem is essentially a different discussion?
Absolutely, Boye. I think they are very much related. And I'm just to extend what he was saying there. Agrees, the self-service journey is really a strategic one, and I think an imperative the bank have to look at. What we found is that there's an issue with the breadth, but I think the depth of the service is also something that the bank needs to look at. And you're talking about partnerships there. You know, they are not just the fintechs, even logistics firms can actually be partnered with. Take, for instance, you as a bank sort of enable the customer to request for debit cards. To make that experience really delightful, you know, you could actually give the customer the option to have that card delivered to a preferred location, whether that's his office or his home or anywhere he chooses. And you don't have to be a logistic business to do that. You have logistic businesses you can partner with, and hence the whole concept of partnership comes to life. And I mean, like you also mentioned, there are other players in the fintech space that have developed niche solutions to attack certain things the bank, for whatever reason, have not done so well. And I think that's an opportunity there for the banks to really look at how to deepen the experience. The breadth is really important. And as the bank also look at the breadth, there are certain transactions or services that the customers tend to request for more frequently. Yeah. I think there's an opportunity there to look at those, look at the business value to be generated from there, and prioritize those type of services.
All right, thanks, Tunji. Ladi, digital lending. Again, this is one of the areas that, looking at the 17 banks, we're just beginning to see people, you know, scratching it. Salary advance, you know, lending to people that have salary accounts. Given what we're seeing with the regulator, GSI, the coming of, of emerging technology, proliferation of data, would you say we've come to an inflection point on digital lending? Is this the right time to attack this opportunity? What's your thinking on this?
Okay, well, from our review, like you rightly said, in the digital lending space, find any leaders. And this is not saying that banks are not offering digital lending in one form or the other, but what we really saying is it's still being played in a very conservative way, almost like it's a risk-driven approach. A number of banks that we reviewed are offering either only salary or payday loans, which sort of gives some comfort because the salaries are, domiciled with the banks. On the other hand, you also have some other banks that are offering personal loans, but at a very micro level where the loan is typically not catering to the needs of the customers. In one particular review that we performed, where the user was looking to get a higher value loan, but was presented with an offer of just about 5,000 or under 10,000 naira, which doesn't reflect the practical reality of the customer. Now, with that said, in the last couple of years, we've seen a proliferation of fintechs, and alternative lenders that are really going after the market. They are doing their work, whether in some cases technology enabled, in some other cases just driven by technology, by intelligence. There are several cases of alternative lenders reaching out directly to professionals on LinkedIn, having profiled them and offering them, enticing loan offers. And what you then begin to question is that how is it that the banks that are able to bring the scale into this play, not taking full advantage of this opportunity, but then as we see with the GSI policy in place, the BVN, it's all coming together and it looks like the market is ripe, for a leader to come into play. The time is right for the banks to also begin to explore partnerships. We believe that the traditional lending process requires a lot of manual reviews, a lot of credit check processes, but with all the technologies, the ability to leverage machine learning and AI, we believe that a lot of efficiency can be brought into this space. The GSI, BVN also helping to manage the risk of default. We believe that definitely this space is ripe for a leader, and we do hope to see more innovation in digital lending in the coming years. So I agree with you. It's a good time to attack this market.
Right. We want to just mention to our audience that you can please post your questions in the Q&A tab. So I'm going to take one of the questions. Landry, this question is around the prototype video that we showed for ACME. And Daniela is asking here that, isn't dependency going to be a big issue as we look at, retrieving, we talked about retrieving KYC from banks. I believe that she's also saying here that if you look at it today, don't we have challenges already from a connectivity perspective for the industry? And therefore, as we go forward and we begin to design around the user, how important is the issue of connectivity for the industry, and what can the stakeholders do about that? Landry.
Well, it's an interesting question. Where the connectivity issue really does exist, I don't think it's significant enough for that innovation not to take root. And I give you a typical example. Today, when people that interact with the bank are using the digital channels, be it the mobile banking application, internet banking application, and the rest, they are at almost every point in time. For most banks are able to guarantee about 95, 98, 99% availability. So the implication of that is for me to be able to use my internet banking application, mobile banking application, and succeed in doing whatever transfer I want to do, it means my phone is able to connect to the core banking system of the bank. So which means connectivity really is not an issue. Yes, it comes into play every once in a while, but we think the bank's network and the infrastructure that supports it is robust enough that we can actually support this sort of model where the banks are able to expose their validated KYC. Another example is the NIP infrastructure, for instance, because there are various ways to attack this issue. You can attack it from the point of the banks being the one hosting this and providing this capability to each other, howbeit at a minute cost. We can also look at it from the point of view of having a centralized body then managing this. An example is the NIP, for instance. And today within the market, NIP availability is, at the minimum 95%, pushing on 99%, 97%, and the rest. So which means if we can support, the infrastructure already exists to support this sort of, this sort of innovation, especially around digital onboarding and KYC verification.
All right, thank you.
Just to add to that, Boye,
okay.
I think as we talk about connectivity, we speak largely about infrastructure. Larry touched a bit on that, but I think the advent of 5G, I think, will really change the play in this space. Banks are also doing really well with regards to deploying monitoring solutions, and not just banks. So if you have a shared KYC platform, which will be some sort of centralization, we've seen centralization of a number of things in Nigeria, already. The needs infrastructure for interbank payment. It's some sort of critical infrastructure for payments in Nigeria. And as much as connectivity glitches can occur, monitoring becomes a real imperative, which we've seen not just the bank, but also need to deploy some sort of monitoring solution to measure uptime and make sure corrective actions can be taken when those connectivity issues do take place.
All right, thanks, Tuji. Still around industry platforms, there's a question here around dispute resolution. And one of the things someone's posted here is around the fact that the reason why we have a number of people in the branches is this issue of failed transactions, resolving disputes, and ensuring that the customer gets his resolution and he gets it on time. Ladi, what can we do differently about this issue?
All right. So dispute, I very much agree. Dispute resolution is one of the big pain points. But then we've also seen innovation within this industry that has helped to streamline the process of reporting a dispute up to tagging the specific transaction and making the experience for the customer somewhat seamless. In line with what Inye shared earlier, I think part of the things that banks need to do better around managing disputes, one is around giving better visibility around the progress of resolving the dispute. Most times when it's an onus, that's a dispute occurring within the same bank, it's resolved faster. But where there's dependency on another bank, then of course you're depending on a reconciliation, settlement and reconciliation statements from the processor, feedback from the other bank to confirm whether or not the transaction indeed went through or not. And in such cases, giving that visibility to the customer also helps. Another approach that we've seen undertaken by banks in other jurisdictions is taking a sort of risk-based approach where you can actually, on the basis of the profile of the customer, apply some intelligence to, and saying, based on the value of this transaction, the profile of this customer, we do not envisage that this customer is lying. And in any case, provide an upfront resolution for the customer by even reversing or making the funds available. And if after the investigation process, we then realize that, there's a certain error, the customer can be debited. But of course, this would depend on some intelligence. This would depend on the banks, knowing their customers, knowing the customer's behavior, and being able to at least have a risk profile for the customer to mitigate this risk. So this is one of the ways that banks can still digitize what seems to be a major chunk of what customers are going to the branches for today.
All right, we're going to round off with two questions. Inye, I want you to take the first question. We've had a series of questions around, look, the more digital, the more customers feel that they feel the exposure to, to cybersecurity attacks, exposure to fraud. What can the regulator, what can the industry do around, what can the industry do to ensure that from a customer perspective, we're giving more comfort to customers. We're bringing down, we're increasing confidence and reducing the incidence of, frauds, cybersecurity events. That's for Ian. And then Lanre, I want you to round up with Stella's question. Stella has asked that we talked about user centricity, we've talked about omnichannel, we've talked about personalization. Can we shed more light on how these things are related to the whole platform discussion? Ian, please.
Okay, so customers can actually be, made more confident in the process. And to start with, everything can actually be digitized and with all the associated risks mitigated to the barest minimum. So one way to do it is to ensure a very robust customer or user authentication process in place for processes that have been digitized. So we need to ensure that customers are able to use their OTPs or two-factor authentication in such a way that the risks associated with hackers or cybersecurity threats, are reduced to the barest minimum. I think this would help to ensure some trust in the process, and I think it's also a trust thing. It's going to take a while for banks to be able to come to terms with this, for customers to also be able to gain confidence in the process.
All right, thank you. I mean,
if I may add to that way.
Okay, Ladi, please.
Just speaking on the issue and cyber fraud, which we've seen increase a lot in the recent times. I also believe that there's an opportunity to invest in more customer awareness and education. It's a known fact that the level of literacy, financial literacy, is still quite low, especially in the rural areas. I believe that there's still quite a bit to be done in terms of sharing experiences and getting the customers a bit more enlightened about how to protect their personal data, to sort of check the activities of fraudulent hackers and other types of threats to their personal details and financial assets.
All right, thank you, Ladi. Lanre?
Yes, but to answer your question around personalization and this whole omni-channel paradigm, as well as personalizing experience for the customer, one of the journeys, one of the thematic areas in which we think we found this, really lack of personalization, a thematic area that is ripe for personalization, and yet we're seeing across the industry a general lack of that, is the payments and transfer journey. What you find, for instance, is payments and transfer is that major journey that a lot of customers come to engage with the bank, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and yet it appears what the banks have done is to deploy entirely the same journey for all customers. And I give you a typical example. I log on to, I was trying to do a subscription, for instance, of over 30,000. I log on to my first banking app, says I've exceeded my, transfer, my bills payment limit, log on to the second bank. And the first bank did not even tell me what that transfer limit was. I logged on to the second bank said you've exceeded your daily limit. I saw that I could update it, and then I tried to update it, but I couldn't really update. The limit was still there. And then I did the third bank, and I was then successful on the third bank. The question then is, why is bank C able to deliver the same functionality that the other two banks, is unable to? And this for customers just sort of gives a point of frustration. What I would have expected was for the bank to have known me enough that, based on, maybe the sort of transactions I'm doing, I shouldn't have a 10,000 or a 30,000 limit on the sort of bills payment I want to do. So we feel this journey is really ripe for personalization. And in terms of designing for the customers, I think the banks need to be a bit more attuned to what their customers are doing. They need to do a bit more analysis, try to know the customer more. This is what will then enable them to say, this is what the customer does. And another example is in the area of transfers, for instance, where I do a transfer at a particular day every month. I don't see the reason why each time I log into my bank app at that particular time, why my bank cannot suggest to me that is this a transaction you're trying to do. And these are all within that whole concept of user-centered design. Just the banks trying to know the customers and be able to deliver functionalities, and experiences that really excite the customer.
Well, let me extend that a bit. There's a common trend, obviously, that ties the whole concept of omni-channel personalization as well as user-centric designs. What we find, and I'll give examples. So you have a customer, for example, is in a space and a particular time, finds it more convenient to onboard via Ussd. We know that there are certain constraints on certain channels. So like Ussd, the bank are constrained in terms of what they can do. So you probably can't, harvest KYC document on that channel. So at best, that customer can only open a tier 1 account. But we also know this customer may need a tier 3 account, and therefore channels can work together. At that point, we expect the bank to be able to say to the customer who has just onboarded, hey guy, this is your account number, but if you need to upgrade this account, you will need to provide XYZ information, and you can provide it on mobile. You just quote this reference ID, which probably can just pull out, your KYC, enable you to sort of provide KYC information at that point. That's channels working together, for example. And I mean, it's all about making sure that you understand the context of the customer based on the data you have of him, and be able to then sort of provide those contextual solutions. I will give you another example around, what we find with experience not at par with what the customer is expecting. So you have a customer who has just onboarded on any of the channels. Again, I'll use onboarding as an example. And for this customer to be able to transact, he probably needs to onboard on a digital channel. Now, some banks are asking this customer to provide maybe certain digit of his debit card. I mean, when you look at that, it's counterintuitive because this customer has just onboarded. He probably doesn't have a debit card, and you are asking him to provide, so you can see there that there's something not working for the customer. And these are issues that can be resolved when the bank can take, a user-centric design approach. Obviously, risk needs to be managed. Compliance is a big issue in bank, and bank needs to be compliant. But user-centric design means you think about the user first and fit every other pieces of the puzzle into the whole picture and make it work.
All right. Thank you. On that note, I want to say thank you, Ladi Tunji, and Landry, for your perspective on the Digital Channel Scorecard 2020. We're going to sort of transition into another panel session now. However, we're going to watch a video first, and then we will go into another panel session, essentially building on, the work and the insights from the scorecard, and just in a sense, sharing perspective of how it's so important to ensure that the entire bank is connected. At KPMG, we call this the connected enterprise. So to deliver experience in front, there are many things that need to come together. Let's watch the video.
Enterprise has an agile and flexible technology infrastructure.
To survive and thrive in the marketplace of the future, businesses will realize that the application of technology at the right time, the right place, will be core to their business model. A A digitally enabled technology architecture is the backbone of the connected enterprise. It harnesses data and analytics. It harnesses digital methods to be responsive to the marketplace, to compete, to win.
When an organization weaves technology all the way through the enterprise, it means they have a fully connected front, middle, and back office.
Relying on all the architecture to hang together that enables that customer experience to come to life.
So they're really a customer-centered organization, regardless of what industry you're in.
A connected enterprise takes an experience centricity by design approach. They really understand from an outside-in perspective the experience that a customer is going to get, that an employee is going to get, as well as their channel partners. It's the experience across the entire enterprise that matters to the end consumer. The idea of experience centricity is at the heart of a connected enterprise.
Connected enterprise creates intentional customer experiences.
Serving as panelists on the second panel session themed Connected Enterprise, orchestrating back-end capabilities to effectively support superior customer journeys on the front end. We have Megan Johnson, fintech researcher, customer journey expert, strategy consultant, UX and design subject matter expert. She is a thought leader, co-founder, strategic advisor, and research guru who helps banks and organizations evolve in the rapidly changing world of digital banking. She supports banks and startups in their quest to deliver truly digital propositions with differentiated customer experience and has worked with over 30 financial institutions globally. Akeem Lawal, Divisional Chief Executive Officer, Payment Processing, InterSwitch Group. A member of the founding InterSwitch management team, he led technology and operations for the company and was responsible for building, operating, and managing the InterSwitch SuperSwitch infrastructure. Bode Abifarin, Chief Operating Officer, Flutterwave. She is responsible for managing operations and performance across the organization and has experience providing customer advisory, strategy, and business model development for financial institutions, as well as proposing a way to scale, improve efficiency, and profits. Ngozi Chidozie, Partner and Financial Services Strategy and Customer Experience Lead, KPMG, Nigeria. She has in-depth experience supporting clients across the continent in delivering large-scale digital and customer experience transformation projects, many of which are leveraging digital and emerging technologies as platforms for growth. To moderate this panel session is our previous panelist, Tunji Odumunboni. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the panelists and moderator.
Good morning again. As they say, true beauty comes from within. It's in recognition of this that we thought it needed to sort of follow up on what we've been talking on with regards to customer experience and leveraging digital to create differentiated customer experience. We know that from the reviews and assessment we did, we probably see half of the story because it's essentially an outside-in perspective. We also know that to create truly digital experiences for customers, a number of capabilities need to come together at the back, from people to technology to processes. And that's something that needs to work in an orchestrated manner from the front to the mid office to the back office. We do have a rich panel this morning to dive into this topic and sharing leading industry perspective as to what banks and indeed organizations with a retail play needs to do to enable truly digital experiences, taking cognizance of what needs to happen at the back as well as what's happening in the front. I'd like to start this morning with Ngozi. Ngozi, could you please help shed more light into this whole concept of connected enterprise. What does that have to do with the whole topic around creating delightful experiences for customer? What does a connected enterprise look like?
Okay, thanks, Tunji. Thanks, Tunji. That's a good question. I mean, connected enterprise is KPMG's customer-centric, enterprise-wide approach to digital transformation. That's actually what it is in its simplest form. Prior to the advent of digital transformation, we've always had business transformation, and it looks at the whole business as a whole. So today we talk digital transformation, and the way KPMG has now positioned to assist numerous clients in that journey is through the connected enterprise approach. And you know, today's customers are better informed, they are very connected, they are more demanding than ever. If you just look at the history of customer experience, they are more demanding than ever. And what we found from our experience is that if you use the connected enterprise approach, and I'll talk a bit about what that is, if you use that approach, customers and clients are more able to yield greater yields on their investments, on the investments that they need. So what is this connected enterprise? Connected enterprise is a methodology or an approach that puts the customer right at the center of everything an organization is doing. So the customer is central. And if you actually listen back from the conversations that we had prior to this, you see that that's the outcome of the survey that was done. So connected enterprise puts the customer right at the center of every decision. So you're connecting and empowering your employees to be able to support the customer promise. You are connecting the organization's front office, the organization's middle office, the organization's back office, so that you are able to fulfill the promise. You are connecting channels and business partners to jointly deliver on the customer promise. And you're also mindful, and you're having an avenue to stay connected to market dynamics and digital signals that you'd find in the larger environment. So there are 5 themes, there are 5 critical lenses that we at KPMG look at connected enterprise. One, which is the most important, is having the customer as central, and then looking at the employees and how you empower them to be able to help deliver the customer promise. Then you look at the factory model, which is your front office, your middle office, your back office, and we call it the factory model, the production line, ensuring that all those are able to assist in meeting the customer experience promise. And the fourth is the channels, the business partners, and last but not the least is the market dynamics and the digital signals. So in a very short synopsis, that's what connected enterprise means.
Thank you very much, Ngozi. I think that provides some level of clarity on the topic. I also think that some of our audience this morning may be thinking, from what you just said, it appears that we are talking about connected enterprise in the context of a number of things to come together, connected to work together to deliver the customer experience, which you said should be at the center of everything. And I think some will also be thinking, but it appears that we are not saying anything new, because this component that you mentioned, whether it's technology or people or even partners, even in a legacy sort of setup, this component seems to always have been connected anyway. For instance, people run operations, people, technology power processes. So what is new? What are we saying that is different in this time and age about connection that banks need to pay attention to? So what sort of capabilities do they need to sort of bring to bear now that have never been there before? Ngozi.
So it's interesting that you say that, and you say that people would wonder what's new. And I would have to agree that there isn't entirely there isn't anything that's entirely new that you would find. I think what we offer is that it's an optimization of what we've also done as a business or as providers or entities. So it's an optimization of that. That's one leg of the answer. Now, the different thing that I would say when you're looking at this digital transformation is, one, it's really being intentional when you say that the customer is key and the customer is king and the customer is central. It's being intentional. It's actually walking that talk, because many times you go to organizations, they tell you that the customer is king. It's just something that you put on the board and you paste on your board, but there is nothing within the organization that ensures that you actually treat the customer as king. So let me make a couple of points, and I'll now tell you what the capabilities you should then have if you're looking at really truly going on a digital transformation journey using the connected enterprise approach. So the first point is that you really need to be intentional when you say the customer is king and putting the customer as central. The second approach or the second thing that connected enterprise as an approach helps you do is that it actually helps you see the elephant as a whole animal. You remember the story of the blind men that saw the elephant, and some of them felt the ears, they felt the legs, they felt the tail, they felt the trunk. And they came away with a different interpretation of what this animal is. So if you use the connected enterprise approach, it shows you all the areas that you should actually look at if you're going on a digital transformation journey. You really have to look at the employees, because they play a big role in being able to deliver. You have to look at your front office, engagement with the customer, the middle office, the production line, the back office, the support functions like HR, finance, technology, and how the role they play. So you have to look at that. You have to look at the channels, how customers actually reach you, be it the apps, be it your mobile or your websites. You have to look at the business partners that you work with. And then you have to look at what's happening in the market, the signals that you find. So what then happens is that you have to have a clear view of the state of your business. And what we do at KPMG is that we use a tool, which is like a very robust digital maturity tool, to assess the state of the business and tell you where perhaps you may be behind and where you may be ahead. And then you work to complete that. So, I mean, the connected enterprise approach in the main helps you focus on the customer and helps you see the big picture. Because when we talk to our clients, many times, intuitively, they know where they want to attack. They may tell you that they're looking at their operations, or they may tell you that, come and help us build this app or design our website, or they may tell you to come and help us with our partners and the interactions with the business. They have different elements, but the connected enterprise as a whole helps you see that whole picture. So that's how I'll answer the first part of your question. Now, there was something else you'd asked. You said, what are the capabilities? So in KPMG, we've actually also thought about that, and we've come up with 8 capabilities, and we've called them the connected capabilities. The first one is when it's insight-driven strategies and actions. It's insight-driven strategies and actions. You really must have that. And for you to be able to do that, you need data and you need the capability of analytics. So many organizations would have an insights or strategy function, but they actually don't use their data and their analytics capabilities the way they should. So when I say that there isn't anything new, yes, but it's an optimization of what people currently do. The second is, another capability is innovative products and services, and it derives very clearly and very strategically from the first point that I've made, which is insights-driven strategies and actions. The third is the experience centricity by design. And I like the discussions that we had on the first panel. You have to be intentional what experience you want your customers to have. And many times when you talk to our clients, yes, they say the customer is king, but they are not as intentional as they need to be to deliver on the promise that the customer expects. And beyond that, you know, the customer can actually be the internal customer as well as the external customer. So the people that work with you and require service from you are actually your internal customers. And so the third point is really around experience centricity by design. The fourth is seamless interactions and commerce. The fifth is responsive operations and supply chain. This is where we're talking about the factory model. The sixth is aligned and empowered workforce. And when you talk about your aligned and empowered workforce, it seems like the regular HR, but it's a little different because you know, when you're thinking about an empowered workforce, you should be thinking about a forward-looking organization. You should be thinking about a culture that fosters innovation. You should be thinking about employees that have the relevant skills, the digital skills to survive in this time and place. And the final, but most important, you should also be thinking about leadership as change agents, because they're the leaders in an organization that drive whatever change you see. So as I talk about some of these capabilities, you'd begin to see that they do exist, but what we're saying is that they need to exist at a higher level. So let me very quickly talk about the seventh and eighth capabilities that we think that organizations should begin to look at if they're looking to enhance their capabilities in digital transformation. I think the seventh one is digitally enabled technology architecture. This is where you're able to have secure architecture and technologies, and you're able to drive scale. You're able to scale up very easily. And the last is the integrated partner and alliance ecosystem, just being able to connect to the ecosystem that will make you quicker to the market and deliver faster to your customers. So I guess to answer your question, a summary is to say, yes, it doesn't seem like there is a lot of difference. It's just the optimization of what currently exists in the marketplace today.
Thank you so much, Ngozi. Optimization of what currently exists, capabilities that probably exist but not where they should be. You mentioned 8 of those. And I mean, the way I look at this is very much a journey, something as complicated as what you've just described. You talked about 8 capabilities, really have to be approached as a journey. And I guess some of our audience will really like to know how best to approach this journey. I'd like to come to you, Akeem and Megan. Are there foundational capabilities? And I guess probably you even see additional capabilities that banks need to deploy from your experiences working with banks, working with financial services provider globally. Are there what you may consider foundational capabilities that sort of start off the journey before you start thinking about adding some other capabilities on top? Akeem, what's your considered view on this?
Thanks. So my view, I think the most foundational thing really is the knowledge worker, right? You need to build an enterprise or an organization of knowledgeable people about what we're talking about. And I'm starting all the way from leadership down to the guy who is at the front line dealing with customer issues. The reason why I say this is I have a fundamental philosophy that organizations run on the flow of information, right? So in order to be able to deliver value in any enterprise, the most important thing is to make sure that the right information gets to the right person or the right interface at the right time to enable the right decision or action to be taken. Yeah? To be able to do that, you kind of need to build every single building block that Ngozi has talked about, right? I don't think there is one piece that you can live without. You need to connect all of that. Now, fundamentally, foundationally, therefore, I think you need to start with the knowledge worker, build a workforce that is built of people who understand and know that this is important, building value interface with customers that delivers the customer experience that the customer needs so that you can build your business on the back of the customer. And I think that knowledge foundation is important. And then the second foundation will be how do you get information
from the organization to the point of interaction to deliver that value in the most effective and efficient way.
Thank you, Hakeem. Megan, you have walked across the globe pretty much, and I know you've seen different banks approach this journey in a different way. But what do you see across all the banks you've worked for that seems to be the basis for starting that journey? Are there foundational things that banks need to sort of pay attention to as they start this journey or continue from wherever they are on this journey?
Yep. Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. It's absolutely great to be back. Yeah, I think for me, it's having worked with lots of different banks of different kind of shapes and sizes and locations and at various points of their digital transformation journey. I think that it's important to know that each organization is different. And while there's certainly, foundations that can be applied to all banks, I think there's no true one-size-fits-all model. But I think some of the kind of core foundations I've seen that have really worked for banks, primarily within Europe, is having subject matter experts across the organization. So, employees that know to a very kind of knowledgeable extent things on, open banking, technology, customer experience, design thinking, and, incorporating those people into all sorts of meetings across various parts of the business. I think also having an environment where ideas can be tested internally and thinking and acting like a startup, and, encouraging product and tech and even, HR and legal teams, to think quickly and not be afraid to fail. That's certainly a foundation I've seen the likes of ING and Lloyds Bank and some of the other leaders here implement. And I think, definitely something that is foundational across any bank is engaging in customer testing early and often. I think what Ngozi said with, a lot of the large enterprises have these posters that say customer is king, but, when push comes to shove, it's, the needs of the business are always, prioritized over what the customer actually wants. For example, I'm working with a client at the moment and they're building something quite revolutionary in terms of payments, and I have joined 9 months into the project, working with one of the global leaders in technology, and they have not done one piece of customer testing yet. No validation, no discovery. I'm actually brought in to be the voice of the customer. And, I'm not entirely surprised because I still think that this is kind of the mindset of the enterprises, but I think, things can't change overnight. And, by perhaps picking 3 to 4, foundational tactics or mindsets, such as, subject matter experts, even internal hackathons or, competitions for customer-centric ideas, and then allowing those employees the time and space to actually build those and kind of thinking like a startup. I think that, those are good foundations and small steps to take in order to become, a truly customer-centric connected enterprise.
Thank you very much, Megan. I just want to, I think you touched on a number of important capabilities. I think something you said that's worthy of note is that, the context for different banks would certainly be different, and therefore the journey has to be approached in a way that sort of addresses those areas that, requires urgent attention, whether it's on innovation or around operations, or some of those other capabilities that Ngozi talked about earlier. I just want to touch on the point that Ngozi made earlier about, the capabilities. She mentioned responsive operations as one of those capabilities. But you are the CEO of a leading fintech in Nigeria, and operations is something that I believe you have a very good insight into, and how that has to be responsive. Can you tell us what are the imperatives for banks with regards to making operations as smart as it should be, operations that are led by data to make important and decisive operational decisions? Bode, over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Tunji.
Okay, so in terms of smart operations, I think what Ngozi and Akim said is like the foundation in terms of the people, having knowledgeable people to be able to anchor these things. One of the things that has really helped us is also taking a journey approach. And I know Megan mentioned startups quite a bit when she was talking. I think one of the key things is the agility of a startup to regroup and form teams. So we have operations, we have people that are very data driven. So everything we do is very data driven in operations. So for instance, when Ladi was talking, he talked about dispute resolution. There's one thing we say in payments, that payment is partnership. So for instance, if a customer, so we power payments for merchants, we power payments for customers. So when a customer, for instance, has a dispute, for instance, one of the things we found out that sometimes you take out, so everything, we try as much as possible to automate a lot of our processes, but we find out that as you work with the banks, as you work with the providers, as you work with the schemes, there are a number of things that bring in this manual intervention. So one thing that has worked is working very closely with the banks to see how we can quickly automate a lot of these things. So for instance, for the refund, we built a platform where when the bank sends us the files for the customers, the merchants can actually upload evidences, whether value was given, whether value was not given, because there's a 24-hour timeline for it to respond to a lot of these things. So automation helps. And then within operations itself, we have people that are data analysts. So they use data, so it's very intuitive. So the merchant can see it's self-service, so they can go on their dashboard, see the evidences that, okay, we gave value to this customer, we didn't give value to this customer, and that's, that is automated. So automation, data and analytics, and having that agile team. So the operations team doesn't work in silo. So we work with the engineering team. So if there are tools that we need to build overnight in terms of this is going to help us. Somebody is working on Excel for 24 hours. What are the things that we can do to ensure that we bring this time to like 3 to 4 hours? So those are the things that we keep doing. We talk to our merchants a lot. We're always trying to find out what is the pain of the customer and how can we ensure that through the journey, we make this process as seamless and as efficient as possible.
Thank you very much, Bodhi. I think you started to touch on the very important topic of data and analytics there. I think just before I go on, I would like to encourage the audience to keep the question coming in. Also, in a short while, I'm going to take a quick poll. But I'd just like to sort of get more perspective on the point on data. I recently saw a quote that says, every business is a data business, which means businesses generate data in one form or the other, but not every business creates value with data. Megan, can you tell us from your perspective, why is this a challenge, given the proliferation of data, given the maturing capabilities we have around AI and machine learning? Why do you think that's still a challenge, and what can businesses do to better leverage data to generate insights?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few challenges. So there's certainly the regulatory challenge, and specifically, here in Europe and parts of the States around, actually acquiring the data and how you can use that data. Even to the point where when you're trying to launch a new product or service that's focused around the extraction of data, so, whether that be something around personalization or contextualization, there's a lot of banks at the moment aren't really able to kind of create an experience that gets the customer on board and makes them feel comfortable. And I think a lot of this is down to banks don't know how to approach the idea of consents and how to position consents in a way that doesn't scare off the customer. So, with banks, there are a lot of strides in trying to do, cool and new and innovative things with data commercialization. But they're just not getting the traction and kind of excitement from customers. So I think there's kind of this consent and, GDPR and other types of regulation that make it a bit harder in other markets. I think also, there's, of course, while large banks have so much data. It's a matter of cleaning up that data and making it easily accessible within different divisions of banks and enterprises. And it's also, I think, creating this mindset amongst different divisions and departments and teams that, sharing data within the organization is a good thing. So for example, the retail division of a bank needs to give access to some data to the corporate part of a bank. Are they in competition with each other? Do they have this mindset of, everything we're doing is for the good of the bank? Everyone has their own KPIs and priorities. So really just kind of making this idea of data sharing and striving to be a data-driven enterprise, definitely one amongst within the organization. This can go back to, being one of the foundations or a pillar in the organization. So I was working with a bank in Scandinavia on the data commercialization team, and every month we had committee meetings in which we had representatives from all different parts of the business, and we would, share our experiences with launching different POCs and trends and, what other banks were doing. And then, those representatives would then disseminate the knowledge and, what other parts of the businesses were working on from a data commercialization perspective to their respective teams. So, it was a small thing, but it really helped in kind of, disseminating this mindset across the business and making, different initiatives more transparent and getting everyone on board to, have this mindset that we're all in this together. And, let's help each other out. And, the more data we can pull together and the more we can streamline the processes, the better it's going to be for the business and for the customer.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Megan. I'd just like to take the poll at this point. We have the poll up now. Which of these capabilities do you feel your organization should prioritize for investment over the next 12 to 24 months? I think you can select as many as 3. We'd like to get your views. This for audience to respond to. But while we get that going, Akeem, the last video we saw, which really sort of provided context to this session, was talking about how technology-enabled, digitally enabled technology architecture is a backbone for the customer experience that we want to create on the front. Can you tell us some of those components of the elements of the architecture that banks need to begin to look at to make sure that the architecture of that technology platform is such that enables what is required from a customer experience perspective?
Yeah, sure, I can. And I think the philosophy to use to think about it is something that Megan kind of referred to around data and data sharing and how data is used. Somewhere in the prep for this session, I think KPMG had said that data is the new oil, right? But if you think about it, you don't put oil in your car. Right. So if data is the new oil, my view is that user experience is actually the petrol, is the refinement of the data that you have to create the right user experience that actually fuels the business and allows it to grow. So the first component I would think about really is how banks implement their data strategy. Again, someone had talked earlier about trying to take a loan from one of the bank apps. And I've had that experience, right? I'm trying to take a loan from a bank and the loan is offering me 5,000. But somewhere in that bank, someone knows my salary, right? They have that information about me, but yet the information that they have available at the point where I'm trying to take a loan only allows them to offer me 5,000 naira. So it's really important to build the right data strategy and the right data architecture to ensure that you can get the right data to the right people at the right time, like I said, to make the right actions or decisions. So that's kind of like the first thing. The second piece, I think, really is around, again, starting from the front end, is what I like to describe as adaptive user interfaces, right? Again, we talk about making the customer the most important, or making customer-centric decisions or user interfaces. But one assumption that we almost seem to all make is to assume that all customers are the same, or all customers expect the same thing, right? So one of the technologies that I'm encouraging banks and indeed every organization to think about is how do you create an adaptive user interface where what is most important to your customer is what is available to that customer, rather than a whole suite of features and functionality that is completely useless to that customer and just seems to clutter the customer's experience. And this goes into thinking about marketing and whatever else is the customer interaction that you're thinking about. Then in terms of the backbone itself, I think there are a number of new technologies that allow us to do things a little bit differently. The concept of microservices, being able to build the service in one part of the organization and reuse it in another part of the organization without having to make significant technology changes, I think is really important. I think there are a number of repetitive tasks that if you do a little bit faster, a little bit better, you can eliminate a lot of the friction that customers experience at the point of interaction. But they talked about automation. I would even go as far as saying robotics process automation, to take some of those mundane daily tasks and automating them and allowing a bot to deal with those so that your customers get a much better experience and your staff are freed up to actually do knowledge work. And then maybe the concept of decentralized databases. One of the things that we find, and I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit more later, is that connected organizations or connected enterprises is not just about your organization alone, right? Building the right ways to interface with all the people that supply information to you so that you can deliver the right customer experience is extremely crucial. And your technology platform must allow those kind of interactions to happen, not only within your organization, but external to your organization as well. And one of the things that we find, and which will probably be my last point on this, is really around fraud. Yeah? A lot of the controls that you find, a lot of the regulation that you find, a lot of the risk processes that you have today in most organizations built around people, right? It's built around manual processes. And they're there for a reason. If you are going to build a connected enterprise and you are going to try and create an organization where information flow and data flow is seamless, you need to build the right tools in the right places to deal with the risk and compliance requirements that requires you to stay afloat as a business. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Akeem. Very useful. Can we see the result of the poll? I'd like to see what the audience think is really critical and important to the digital transformation agenda. And I think while we switch to that, Ngozi, I really just want to come quickly to you. From what all we've heard and all that's been said, it seems to me like we have pillars for this that needs to really sort of come together to achieve this digital transformation objectives. And I put these pillars into three different categories: technology, you have culture, people, and all related to the people agenda. You also have strategy, and businesses have always sort of been strategic in the way they approach their play. Can you tell me from your perspective, which one of these three components do you think is more important as we approach the play for digital transformation? And also looking at the result from the poll, are you surprised by any of the things coming up? We are seeing a lot of the people tilt towards experience centricity by design, innovative product. I think that's about 44 and 41% respectively. Are you surprised by that in any way, Ngozi?
Well, to me, polls never surprise me. The outcome that you get from a poll would really be the state of life of the person that's filling the poll. And I'm also going to use that thinking to sort of answer your question. You've segmented the pillars into technology, and they're broad segments. I think they're more than that, into technology, into culture and people, and into strategy. I think perhaps we have more segments than that. But I guess my answer to it would be that people would reach out to you. And I think the message I want to use this discussion to sort of bed down is that if you're looking at digital transformation, it makes a lot of sense to look at it from a comprehensive manner, and which Connected Enterprise helps you do. If you do a simple digital maturity assessment, it tells you where you are on all the major pillars. What we find is that people use intuition. So perhaps if you're talking to an HR director, he or she would anchor the discussion from a culture and people perspective. How do I get my people to be digitally savvy? How do I get them to use the technologies that we have implemented? By the way, people will only use technologies implemented if it helps their work. So if you've implemented something without the perspective of the employer or the user, they would bypass it. And so an HR director would look at it from that perspective. A chief digital officer or a technology person would look at digital transformation from a technology perspective. What technologies do I need to implement? What apps do I need to build out so that people would engage? A strategy officer would look at it, perhaps the MD will also look at it from a strategic perspective, to say, okay, how do I get my company to the 21st century? How do I become more how am I able to respond to the changes that I'm seeing in the market? So depending on who it is you're talking to, the person will look at it from his area of bias. I think the thing I want us to take away from this discussion is that if you want to do a good job, if you want to really transition yourself on a digital transformation journey, you actually have to start by looking at your organization as a tabula rasa, doing the digital assessment that's required so that you know where you're further ahead and where you are behind. And then with that, you can now prioritize what you want to focus on. So it's not an easy answer to say it's technology or culture or people or even how you interact with vendors and how you open up your system so that external third parties can connect. It's beyond that. It's really looking at your organization as a blank slate and doing the assessment that tells you where you are so that you can now decide how you want to prioritize your journey. That would be my advice, and that advice is obviously I'm a consultant. That's how we use a framework to answer most questions.
Thank you very much, Ngozi.
Can I jump in quickly?
All right, go ahead, Ngozi.
Is that okay? Sorry, it's Megan here.
Hi, Megan. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to say I'm not surprised, but I am a bit disappointed that aligned and empowered workforce is at the bottom of this. I think this is something that's hugely underrated. I think it's quite easy, to get excited about innovative products and services. But I think, what Ngozi said about the people, tech, and processes, I think even if you have, the best designers, the best tech, unless you have the right people and processes behind it, I don't think you will have a successful digital transformation. And I think that's kind of any size business, and just kind of something that's quite relevant to what's happening in Europe, specifically Germany and Berlin. N26, one of the leading European and soon to be global challenger banks, they're having a lot of issues between the management and the employees. There's a huge issue around, the employees want to set up a works council. They have such a high, turnover rate amongst employees. And I'm an N26 customer, and I can see that, these unhappy employees and this lack of processes and investment in people over the past year has been translating into what the actual product looks like. So I just wanted to say, while this is at the bottom, I think it's worth kind of, considering, is this something that we should be thinking about more? Because I think without this empowered workforce, you can't get to innovative products and services and really implementing a culture where you have centricity by design.
Very insightful, Megan. I think that point you're making there sort of ties to the question that Stella is asking. So the point around banks not really leveraging the partnership agenda as well as they could. So I'm going to read the question, and I'm going to be looking to Akim to provide response to this question. Banks tend to be more dependent on internally available and generated customer data to inform their innovation, with limited effort at pulling data and insight from external sources outside of the bank and banking system. Outside of competitor insight and outsourcing research, what other avenues can banks use to harness access to a broader data set from the market? Akim.
Yeah, I think this is I think Stella has touched on a real problem that exists in this market, probably in any other market, right? And I would argue that it's one of the reasons why the regulators came up with things like GDPR and NDPR to make information sharing and information access a little bit easier and more streamlined. So I think the first part of the answer for me would be organizations need to think about NDPR and GDPR not as restrictions, but as enablers, right? It gives you the ability to use the same set of rules and guidelines to get access to information that is held by someone else, yeah? I think that's probably the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is organizations typically share information, right? One of the things we found, because I basically champion the data strategy for InterSwitch, is that we tend to have a lot more information than we think we do as an organization, right? And there's a lot of publicly available information that we don't tap into. So one of the challenges, and I think it's probably the first place to start as an organization, is to start thinking about where is this information or where is this piece of data within my organization, yeah? And see if you can make that available. The next step will then be which of my partners are willing to share the information with you and what kind of data sharing agreements can we come to, of course, within compliance of the existing regulations, and then doing those partnerships so you can do data sharing. So for example, InterSwitch is currently doing some kind of data sharing agreements with people who want to do loans, people who are trying to build customer dashboards and insights to better build their products. And we're doing that, giving us access to both partners' data, but also importantly, building that better product of that better customer experience by sharing data. And I think these are the two immediate points or steps that you can take to get access to external data.
Thank you very much, Akim. Very useful. I think the topic of partnership is generating some buzz amongst the audience. There's another question around partnership, which I'd like Bode to tackle. From Asafat. From a partnership point of view, what can be done when failure is coming from the partners that negatively affects customer experience, especially where there's no alternative? She mentioned like Akim's team in cash transaction. So I think the point there is what can be done when you partner with a fintech, or as a fintech you partner with a bank, and the customer experience issues is really coming from your partner. What can be done? Practical examples that you've seen maybe your organization adopted or other players adopted to tackle this kind of challenge.
All right, thanks, Sunji. In fact, I have a very live example. So last week or 2 weeks ago, when customers do transactions, they see our names on the receipts. But there was an issue in the industry where a lot of the banks that we partner with, they have third-party providers that are helping them in processing files and all of that. So there was a breakdown in all of that. And when that happens, so you can imagine there are a lot of people that are involved. Us as the payments processor, there's the acquiring bank, there's the third party to the acquiring bank, and then there's the issuing bank. That's the bank of the customers. So, there's always, in this digital age, there's always outcry across the channels, it's on social media. So I think one of the things that we have tried to do in the past 3 months is communication. So there are a number of things that we've done. So internal communication. So when something breaks, we have a system where we report a lot of these things internally, because you can't scale what people don't understand. So when people internally understand what's happening, it's one of the key things. And then the other thing that we also focused on is customer education. I think it was Ladi that mentioned it. We have a very active product marketing and storytelling team. It's not something that you can ignore, especially in fintech, who tell your stories, because people are just like, oh, Flutterwave is down again. They have that issue. Failures have started, but there are NDAs to which you have with all these parties as well. So how do you manage that? So education in terms of explaining how even payment works, but customers are not really interested in that. They just want to come, do their transactions and go. So a lot of education in terms of how payment works, a lot of blog posts. That's why you see a lot of fintechs doing videos in terms of this is how it happens. And then on the support side as well, somebody has said not one size fits all. So for instance, for a lot of our big enterprises, we have people that we call technical account managers. So these people are technical, they're engineers, but they also support people. So if anything happens, they're able to troubleshoot and explain to the merchant. So big merchants like the Ubers, the Netflix, they have people managing those accounts. Then on the support bit as well, providing the customer with enough information. So part of what we've done practically is like build a dispute tool. So if you did a transaction maybe August 2nd and you're just getting the debits on the 21st, you're wondering, you did the transaction, but you can't remember because, time has passed. So we built a tool where once you put in the references, it will remind you that, wow, you did this transaction, because, that also helps. Akim talked about intuitiveness in terms of user experience. So if a user comes to your app or your platform, they already know what to do. You're giving them enough information. If something breaks, you're also giving them a timeline. They just want you to communicate and explain when that happens. They want to know when it will be resolved. So a lot of all these things, FAQs, ensuring that all your channels are active, using data to also know when your peak period is so that you can shuffle people around. So a lot of those things, I think customer education is one of the key things that I had said. And then also finding ways to ensure that, the consumer protection. So if something happens, who do they go to? How do they navigate? Do they have all of those information? I think that those are some of the critical things. And if you're on one level of digitization and you're depending on your partners, it doesn't mean that the partner is also on that level as well. So we've seen that working with a lot of those partners too has helped to also upgrade their the level of how they think about digital and how we offer these services to customers as well.
Thank you very much, Bode. I think on this note, I would like to say a very big thank you to all my panelists this morning for sharing rich domain insight on the topic of connected enterprise and how businesses need to pay attention, not just to the front end where that touches the customer directly, but also to all the different elements of the enterprise that enable the rich customer experience that is sought after. Thank you very much. And we just move to the next segment of the webinar, which is really going to be focused on launching our TL, our thought leadership publication around the digital channels Scorecard. Thank you.
To launch the KPMG Digital Channels Scorecard publication titled Leveraging Superior UX on Digital Channels to Drive Retail Banking Growth in Nigeria, let us welcome the partner and head, Technology Advisory and Markets, KPMG in Nigeria, and head of Cybersecurity, KPMG in Africa, Joseph Tebe.
Thank you very much. Good morning once again, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you for your participation so far and trust that you have found the presentations and discussions very insightful. All the speakers and panelists have provided some highlights and perspectives on emerging digital channel trends in retail banking, the key opportunities for differentiation, and also improvement of overall user experience in the banking for the banking customers. As part of our continued contribution to driving a sustained focus on customer experience improvement generally, KPMG has collated findings from our review into a report called the Digital Channel Scorecard Report, which provides more in-depth analysis and recommendations. It is my pleasure, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to officially launch the Digital Channel Scorecard Report, which will theme leveraging superior user experience on digital channels to drive retail banking growth. Ladies and gentlemen, this report elaborates on why digital channels matter in today's world. It also details scorecard across select retail banking customer journeys and also specific recommendations for enhancing customer experience. The report is publicly available and can be downloaded from our website using the link that you see on the slide right in front of you. The link has also been published in the webinar chat room for your convenience. Please feel free to download the report and share within your organization and the network. This is our first inaugural edition of the publication. We hope that after this inaugural edition, we tend to continually perform these reviews on an annual basis and will publish this scorecard annually going forward. We hope you find our publication very useful in the quest to drive customer-centric experience and overall business growth, and then we welcome your feedback as you go through this publication. Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. At this juncture, I think we have come to the end of this webinar. That was our last activity. I would like to thank all the speakers, all the panelists, and our very distinguished participants, especially our clients and our prospective clients who have joined this webinar, despite your busy schedule. Would like to thank you sincerely for spending the time with us and look forward to sharing our knowledge and partnering with you on digital channels experience going forward. Thank you very much and have a great day.